Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining this session. I'm sure that as lunch is being finished off, folks will be piling in. I'm really excited, no joke, I'm really excited to be here to have this discussion, especially when it comes to all the market trends and opportunities that exist in decentralized ID based on blockchain. So my name is Wook Lim. I'm with Samsung. I work at the Samsung HQ office. I am part of the service planning group, and I want to go ahead and introduce some folks that we have here that have some great ideas, great thoughts and visions when it comes to how to go about protecting and ensuring that our personal information, data and whatnot are secure but can be also conveniently used. And towards that end, we're talking about, of course, decentralized ID, or what's commonly known as DID. And before I introduce these folks, I just want to give you some pre-information about why we're hosting this. Of course, from a Samsung perspective, we have a deep interest in personal ID and how we can go about securely allowing our users to conveniently use this data, which is, of course, theirs and theirs to do with. And with that said, we have a very strong interest in blockchain. So how do we go about marrying these two? And this is where DID is an area that we can look at to try to get this out to the public and try to provide something great. Do no evil. Do something great for the consumers. And I think it's a common but sad thing where we see different types of security breaches and whatnot with major companies that hold your information. Of course, that leads to a lot of challenges for you personally when it comes to, of course, rectifying the mistakes that have been occurring. And of course, on a global level, you have Europe and other areas where they're looking at GDPR. Here in the States, we're looking at different ways of managing self-sovereign and identities and whatnot. So I think there's so many different aspects of guarding your personal data, which is critical to understand, and not only understand in regards to what's happening today, but what can we work towards? What solutions are there that'll help us? And with that said, you're here because you want to participate in this. You want to know more about the trends. You want to know what is happening out there so that you can perhaps prepare your work, your business, or whatever, or maybe even on a personal level, you can enlighten yourself on how you can be a part of this movement to securely control one's data. So let's go ahead and meet our panelists. Why don't we go ahead and start it off with Ankur.
Hi, my name is Ankur Patel. I'm a program manager at Microsoft. My role on this team is to help grow our identity business. Identity at Microsoft is consumers and enterprises, right? So it's 800 million monthly active user of consumers, but then there are 22 million enterprises, including Samsung, that runs on Azure Active Directory. The question in all of that is, how many humans? We don't know. We can't know. So that's where I've been working on this new incubation effort for the last couple of years around decentralized identity and making it a first-class citizen of the Microsoft identity stack so that we can empower every person on this planet to achieve more, which is our mission statement. We can't do that by using just a centralized system. I look forward to participating in the panel to talk more about that.
Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Alain.
My name is Alain Neyroud, and I work for IBM. I belong to a small consultancy group called the Garage, and what we do, we help customers innovate with the cloud, and more specifically in my case, with blockchain and SSI. I've been involved with SSI for the past 12, 15 months, working on early projects with early adopters, using the sandbox that IBM has built around that technology. And I'm working very closely with the engineering team to provide feedback and help progress the offering.
Thank you. Welcome. Jungsun.
My name is Jungsun Kim. I'm first-time panel in this stage. I'm in charge of blockchain business team at SK Telecom. I have more than 15-year experience in telecommunication industry. SK Telecom is the leader in the mobile telecommunication market in South Korea. Our four main business areas are mobile network operator, security, and media, and commerce, based on 5G and AI. And we are seeking business opportunity in emerging technology like blockchain. And in early 2019, we are starting mobile credential business based on theDID with the Ministry of Science and ICT of Korea. The project is for solving issues related to data privacy and data ownership. In addition, the project is aimed to realize the philosophy of self-sovereignty. And currently, Samsung Electronics and 3 major telecom operators of Korea and 4 major banks and some other financial institutions are participating in our consortium blockchain network as a node. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Drummond.
I'm Drummond Reed, and I wear a number of hats. At Evernham, my title is Chief Trust Officer, and that's Chief Identity Officer, Security Officer, Privacy Officer rolled into one because that's what we're building is trust infrastructure. Evernham was a company that first developed the underlying code for what's now the Sovereign Network. We helped start the Sovereign Foundation. I'm one of the founding trustees there. And at the Sovereign Foundation, which is an international nonprofit to operate a global public utility for self-sovereign identity or decentralized identity, I chair the governance framework working group because the technology, as important as it is here, is only one of 3 layers. There's a technology layer, there's a legal layer for actually agreeing how we're going to produce and enforce and audit trust. And then there's the whole business layer on top of that, which I'm very excited about because I think we really are going to unlock a lot of business potential. So I work at all 3 of those layers. At the bottom layer, I led the team that did the first version of the decentralized identifier specification. I was actually funded by the Department of Homeland Security here in the US, and it's now gone to W3C. And we now have the full W3C working group started in September. Very excited about that. I'm still one of the co-editors of the spec. And I think all of us here are involved in that. So it's laying a really solid foundation.
Thank you. As I said, distinguished gentlemen, distinguished panelists, you're going to get a lot out of this. So please, I hope you get a lot of it out of this session. And we're going to start with a very softball, very easy to answer question, so it's going to be a free-for-all, but my first question is this. What major differences do you see between legacy identity services compared to, of course, decentralized identity?
Drummond, you've been at this the longest.
Well, this is the point where I take out my wallet. Because, and ironically, Ankur and I were talking, I want to give a lot of credit to Microsoft and their now retired chief architect, Kim Cameron, for the original idea of information cards, which is, I think, almost 14 years old now.
Yeah.
Right? But he saw, it was like, why are we logging into websites with usernames and passwords when we don't do anything like that in the real world, right? We have a way of doing identity that works very well. Every one of you got here, either through a plane or a rental car, and you use the credentials in this wallet, and it works everywhere around the world. And it's decentralized. There is no one centralized provider, right? What we don't have is these on a smartphone or mobile device or any device that we have in a way that we can do. One of the things I love about being here at Samsung, the developer conference, is Samsung is one of the world leaders in security on smartphones. They can secure these credentials on a smartphone better than I can secure them in a piece of leather. So fundamentally, the big difference here is we're moving from what we call account-based identity. You are the sum of your accounts, and if you delete them all, you disappear from the internet. When we move to decentralized or self-sovereign identity, you have as many credentials as you obtain from different issuers, just like in this wallet, and then you share them. They're issued to you, and you share them where you choose to share them.
At Microsoft, that was one of our realizations as we were doing one of these reviews with executives, right? And you say, we have hundreds of millions of these and tens of millions of those, and the question from the staff, executive staff was, how many humans? I can't answer that. Because the thing is that we don't have digital identities today. What we have is a whole bunch of digital accounts. And the identity is actually spread all over the internet. And the only people who can put it together are ones who are doing it through nefarious means. Sure. Right? So the whole point of this going to decentralized model, as Drummond just mentioned, is to allow us to understand our digital identity and have control over it in some way, which is just not true today.
Okay. So Drummond, you brought along a visual aid. Can you share with the audience later so we can pass it around maybe and get a better look at what you had there? But thank
Notice
you for that.
I hold it very carefully.
Understood. So the next question, the audience, of course, this is DevCon, this is Samsung's Developers Conference, and we have a lot of technical folks here. And not that we can spend a lot of time on this, but from a technical aspects, how does DID advantageously protect all the users' data? What's their technical framework? How does it work?
How does it work?
Yes, how would you go about protecting private data?
So it's based, first it's privacy by design. So the aspect of protecting the information is critical to the fundamental of the design. The second basis is ownership of the data. So like, in the demonstration, you own your wallet with all your credentials. Well, the principle of SSI is based on the same concept. It's essentially you own your information. It's also the ability to establish peer-to-peer connection with the entities that you're interacting with in order to be able to present those credentials, right? And finally, it's the existence of a global registry where a verifier and issuer can exchange information to verify that the credential you're proposing are actually, what you expect from them.
Sure.
So it's a set of components when integrated together gives these powers that decentralized identity is bringing to identity today.
Thank you.
As Alain said, I think the privacy by design principle is the basis of the DID architecture. For example, creating one single public DID for an individual on the blockchain ledger is not appropriate according to the privacy by design. And one single DID may be used for correlation of the personal data. So we want to solve this problem by using pairwise unique DIDs, by sharing a different private DID for every relationship. And in addition, storing personal data or the hashing value of the personal data directly on the blockchain ledger is very dangerous. So verifiable credentials need to be stored only on off-chain.
Okay, thank you. So let's accelerate things a bit. There's different ideas and different methodologies, but if we were to achieve a utopian world where everyone's privacy is respected, they have control and whatnot, how do you see it? What's your viewpoint? You represent 4 different very prestigious companies. What is your viewpoint on it, and how can we go about balancing the nature of securing the information at the same time allowing for user convenience? What is the ideal scenario?
On that point, I want to point out there's famously in the industry, identity and cybersecurity industry, considered to be a trade-off between security and usability, right? The more secure you want it, the bigger the barriers that you put in front of users. And one of the things that I'm literally ecstatic about, and the Evernham executive team, we give presentation after presentation, talk after talk, of saying, with self-sovereign, decentralized identity, you no longer have to make that trade-off. And you've probably seen demonstrations. If you haven't, you can go see them here at Booz here, of completely passwordless, usernameless authentication, okay? No username, no password to remember. That done with decentralized identity, using a digital wallet and the credentials in that wallet is stronger than any form of digital identity you're using on the internet today. And it's much easier. I've literally had people at parties, cocktail parties say, what do you do? I say, well, I'll boil it down. We're just getting rid of usernames and passwords. I've had them reach out and hug me. Say, please, right? So that's, I think, a really good example. We are going to give up on, we no longer have to make that trade-off. We'll have much better user experience. And it's not just to authentication. With those digital credentials, you're also now sharing the critical information that the service provider, the website, needs to authorize you to do things, right? A lot of form filling will go away with digital credentials. And not only are you not having to type that, The party that's receiving it, called the verifier in this, is getting verified information. Where can they get that from an individual on the internet today?
And it's not just a verified information. It's from the most suitable authoritative source, right? It's not proxies like sign in with your favorite social ID provider to, I don't know, is it appropriate to use that to fly? Probably not. Is it appropriate to book a restaurant with it? Maybe. Do you get to track me then between my home and the restaurant with it? I don't know. Are you going to give me a discount because of it? Like, these are the questions that we just haven't had the opportunity to ask because that choice has never been possible. But by partnering with people like Samsung who make this by default in the phone is the right step forward, right? Like Apple announced recently the sign in with Apple, burner email addresses. How many people saw that? Right? The issue with that one is those things are managed by Apple for you. The point, why bother? Right? Versus the world that Drummond describes is one that puts the user at the center of this conversation. And so our job in that utopian world is to provide tools and technologies that remove that false trade-off of security and usability or value and privacy. Right? Maybe you can have both of those things, and there's a balance to be struck there. Because again, as a large corporation, I still care about, I have shareholders who expect value in return, but how do you strike the balance? And we think decentralized identifiers help us do that. Alain, you were trying to say something.
Yes, I mean, one of the things that fascinated me working with customers is the fact that, you know, as much as you said, authorization is kind of an endpoint today with traditional technology. With SSIs, that's just a beginning, because on top of that, you can build a lot of things with trusted credential. I'm fascinated by the initiative of Kiva in Africa with the Kiva protocol, whereas they're trying to give access to better financing beyond microloans by enabling people to accumulate and carry their own credit history, while there is no such support in that country, right? I've also been involved in the education space, whereas SSI is a vector eventually to completely revolutionize the way you're going to be looking for a job and the way employers are going to consider candidates, because they can rely on a whole host of information that is verified up front when they start interacting with you. So it's very interesting.
That's great that you just shared this with us, because I think sometimes in our developed states, sometimes we forget about the practical uses that we can use every day. Yeah. So thank you for sharing that. So I'm going to kind of make this a little bit more personal with the next question. You know, whether it's consuming your own dog food, or as I like to say, drinking your own champagne, what are you respectively doing at your own companies when it comes to DID and trying to implement it so that you could certainly speak with confidence in regards to the things you share at events such as this?
I'll get started, I guess.
Okay.
So we have responsibilities for consumers as well as enterprise customers. And in between, we have professionals at LinkedIn, which is part of Microsoft as well. What if every member on LinkedIn had a verified professional check mark next to it? How might that change this room's interaction by itself?
Powerful.
Right? So that's just one of the steps. We have publicly stated that our intention is to make decentralized identities a first-class citizen of the Microsoft identity stack, which means respecting the privacy, which means having this no password world, which means being able to sign into Windows and having shared PCs without having to worry about whose password I need on here or whatever. So you can imagine our existing products and services for consumers, professionals, and enterprises get dramatically better. And we don't make money from people's data. We make money by giving trust and making our product trustworthy. So this, we believe, will help us further bolster that than what we're able to do today.
All right, let's go down the firing line. IBM, what are you guys doing when it comes to drinking your own champagne?
Well, I mean, we're interested to, of course, deploy SSI capability within the organization, but we're more focused right now in building a set of tools that are easily consumable by the community and helping them discover what they can do with that platform. And as such, for example, people like me and in my group, we're advocate internally and externally to project the interest for that platform. and bringing people to try and use it.
Excellent.
To interject for 1 sec, so we're partnering with other parts of IBM, for example. So we have 22 million customers who run on it, and partners like IBM help accelerate adoption of such things. So as much as we do for ourselves, this helps this technology become default for many other customers beyond, right? So it takes an ecosystem.
And Jong-sun, from a carrier perspective, operator perspective, what can you share?
I think DID and verifiable credentials can be used not only to prove identity, but also the ownership or qualification or the access right to some facility or any of the things. We started some project about the access control based on DID. And next month, we will launch that service based on DID. We can replace identity card with mobile DID phone. We can access to some facility with that mobile application.
Excellent, thank you. Look forward to it. And then Drummond, you guys live it and dream it just like everybody else. What can you share when it comes to how you guys go about drinking your own champagne, which I wonder what's in your glass there?
Well, in our case, Evernham is a company that's the only thing we do, okay? All we do is decentralized identity, self-sovereign identity. We work the whole stack from the specifications through the open source software, value-added software, services, governance frameworks. So our own internal use, we have a general wallet called Connect.me that, in fact, we do use. Our first use, we actually have quarterly employees a contest for the most innovative new use. We've done the cookie jar thing, right, in the office. We've done various other things. But mostly we're focused on enabling our customers to go and, one example, for instance, that is public out there is what we call the Alberta credential ecosystem. Actually, that's their name for it. This is the province of Alberta in Canada. And it illustrates, I think, an important point, which is the use cases, the greatest value from decentralized identity and verifiable credentials is usually within an ecosystem. It's a group of companies and partners where they all can exchange credentials and produce, really exponential more value. It's a little bit like you start creating websites. They don't just serve, they serve everyone who needs that website, and then they link to other sites. And it was the same thing. So Alberta credential ecosystem, you've got Alberta Trust Bank that is going to issue credentials to their bank account, to their account holders. They want the account holders to then go use them with Telus, the carrier there in Alberta, in much of Canada. And that will help Telus actually onboard customers more easily. In turn, they want to actually subscribe to change of address from Telus back. And so they're both getting, and then there's a set of universities there that are saying, we want to make it easier to onboard our students, and we want them to have employment histories that they can come and use at companies like ATB. So it's an ecosystem, and so we help others drink their champagne.
That's what we're trying to do.
That's it.
So with the next question, I think this is one that's a little bit closer to ourselves because we're running this all the time, and I'm sure you guys do, but there's lots of POCs, proof of concepts, that we tend to run because whenever we as corporate employees have an idea and we go to our bosses and say, I can do this, our boss is going to say, well, prove it. And this is where POCs come into play. And I know that in Korea, we actually had a POC that we ran with SK Telecom. So I want to ask you guys, what have you guys seen? And maybe you can share some of the POCs that you've run and some of the results. And let's start with Jong-sun because, again, Samsung had worked closely with SKT, and we definitely like to hear what you guys did and what you've learned.
It is very important to make sure the user's DID and the private keys for DID and verifiable credentials are kept safe on the mobile phone. Especially financial institutions in Korea have a very strict security regulation or guideline, such as key management on the mobile phone. So we are working with Samsung Electronics blockchain team to meet the security requirement in the financial institution. I think if we cannot meet that guideline, DID service is not working in actual case.
But it worked. What about some of the other companies here? What have you guys done, and what have you guys seen?
Well, I mean, one of the aspects that I mentioned, I did several projects in the space of learning credential. So it's a fascinating domain.
Yes.
I think that some of the learning from my perspective was maybe two important dimensions we need to take care of, which is the real life is more complex than what the standards support today. So when you're speaking about a credential, for example, in the learning space, we're speaking about a very large number of those credentials, right? So even though you think you have only one diploma, actually a college push a lot of information around yourself, right? And in the enterprise, micro-badging is also accentuating that phenomenon, right? So the scaling and the ability to manage corpus of data, which is more complex than maybe a driving license, is something we need to take care of. The second aspect is that I think there is a lot of discussion about protocols and technology, but we spend not enough time with the user in the loop. And think about, a job searcher or a student when interacting with a wallet and having to disclose information and make decisions and having eventually to manage a large number of credentials, because credential will become pretty much any kind of data you could manipulate, right? So I think there is an urgency around human factor, if you wish. So having a design-centric approach so that we make sure we don't forget the consumer in the loop.
That's key for sure. And now, what about the end caps? What do we have here when it comes to what you've learned?
Well, interestingly enough, the first POC I would throw out is actually one that Evernham and Microsoft collaborated on with the NHS, the National Health Service in the UK. And the reason, besides just being a classic use case, the person driving that was actually one of the other original stewards of the sovereign network, because they said this, and he's a doctor. He was a doctor in the NHS, and as a young doctor, he was very technically savvy, and he got introduced to a system, it's nationalized healthcare in the UK, where doctors are shared between hospitals, and they finally did the research and revealed that 2 weeks of an annual year, 2 weeks of time of a doctor's time is burned up going and proving their credentials and their authorization to go from hospital to hospital, and which they have to do frequently. So he looked at this, and also the way it was affecting the standards of care, and the fact that the standards were so lax, there were literally people masquerading as doctors that weren't real doctors. He said, we got to solve this. We have the digital technology. He had no idea how to do it, but just at that time, he was discovering these technologies and the start of the Sovereign Foundation. He determined and left the medical profession to start a company to do that. Their name is True, T-R-U-U, and they just, what was it, about 2 weeks ago?
2 weeks ago.
Yeah. And they're working with not just NHS, but the General Medical Council that provides those medical credentials, with the post office, right?
The citizenship and your eligibility to work.
Exactly. Go ahead, Ankur, and share your perspective.
So we partnered with them on it together. The goal here was to prove interoperability, right? Because if the idea is this is an identity that you own and control, it cannot be based on proprietary technology by any one of us. And so we got together at one of the conferences, and we were like, well, let's pick this one as the hero scenario to just focus on. And as a community, we work in Decentralized Identity Foundation. We came together and says, okay, this is the key use cases we'll describe interoperability on, which was one of those key learnings, that it's all well and good to have specs and theories of how such a system could work, but unless and until you can make it interoperable between two different technology providers. So in their case, they used the wallet that was built using Evernham's stack, and Enterprise is on a 30-year-old Microsoft technology on Active Directory. So in this case, the doctor was signing in using their phone with these verified credentials into a 30-year-old application. And that's possible, and that's what we demonstrated 2 weeks ago. That was a huge step forward, right? And we're now talking about, okay, what's the next thing, therefore? But I think it highlights those 3 key problems for us as lessons learned. One was ease of use around it, of just how do you describe any of these ideas? And rule number 1 was do not use the word DID in it. Like, no, I don't even know how to describe that at times, right? So telling a normal person that this is better than username passwords. That's crazy.
That's all you need to say.
Right, so that's the first one. The second one was around performance and scale of these systems. The current world has been around for 30 years. It's been hardened, it's been proven, better or worse. It has that head start over these new ideas we're coming up with, and it needs to live up to even higher bar of assurance and security, even higher bar where who are you gonna call when you lose your username and password? The issuer. In this case, you are the issuer. Who are you gonna call? So there's some really hard problems in this, right? And then the final one is standards. We're imagining a whole new internet, or moral equivalent of it, like the front door to the internet. The current one took several years and decades to get there. So to imagine this will just happen is going to be challenging, right? But it will happen if we stay focused and make small progress like this POC, for example. So those are the 3 key lessons for us.
So you touched upon something that I was going to ask later, but let's get to it. You know, as we advance, as you try to push this, you guys are definitely strong evangelists for this movement. And we know it'll be an eventuality, but I think one of the things that we have to handle besides interoperability, or to allow for interoperability, is standards. You said it yourself, Ankur. So how do we do that? How do we come to a unified protocol or language or whatnot? Because obviously, all 4 of us here, 5 of us, we represent different types of companies, and we all have our interests. We're for-profit companies. So how do we do that? How do we? That may be the last hurdle. So how do we overcome that?
Well, as someone who's been working on the base level standard for DID, I don't actually think it's any different than the standards we've had to establish for the internet to work, for the web to be interoperable. In fact, we directly form an analogy or compare what we call the SSI or trust over IP stack that we're developing for interoperable trust, and of which DIDs, the decentralized identifiers and DID methods, are the base layer, with the TCP/IP stack that makes the internet work. Yep. I strongly agree with Ankur. We won't get there overnight, but I've got news for you. We started several years ago.
Yeah.
So the standard for verifiable credentials, the exchange format and signatures, digital signatures on those, is about 30 days from being a 1.0 standard at W3C.
Yeah.
Right? That working group is, there's going to be another generation, but the first generation is done. And the DID standard is now a full W3C working group. It just started, but that's after 3 years worth of work. Yep. So I think those 2, and what we're doing is also collaborating as companies on the other pieces we'll need. Go ahead, Ankur, and talk about it.
We actively talk about this as us versus them. And the us is this new world, and them is status quo. And so currently, we're all in this together. There is our shared value is creating this new world, right? And we're focused on making customers like NHS or IBM having a practice to go sell on consulting, or telecom companies being able to launch a new verifiable friction-free experience, for example. But we are in it together to say, how are we going to do this? And we tend to converge a lot faster than those previous versions of wars that have taken place. And I think having people like us who have established applications and services supporting it natively allows for the transition to happen, right? It's not one where we're saying, instead of, this is not instead of, this is a step up, this is better. So it's an optionality that we're building on top of it versus rip and replace. Mm-hmm. So those are some of the key tactics why we think we may get there.
Good. So I think when it comes to where we're going, there's going to be a huge ecosystem. There's a lot of different players in this particular space. So we have everybody from operators to OEMs. We have cloud players. We have verifiers. Jung-Sung, with your role in the operator carrier world, how do you think all these players fit in? What are their roles in this new society or new world that we're trying to get to?
From the perspective of the DID service provider or mobile operator, such as SK Telecom, creating and distributing SDK or API, which makes it easy for the issuer or the verifier to connect issue and verify via our SDK is very important for the rapid DID ecosystem. I think ecosystem strategy is very essential to increase the number of participants. If there are only a few issuers or only a few verifiers, users will not use this service. So we have to consider the incentive mechanism to encourage the potential issuer or verifier to join our network. I think that the mechanism design used in the game theory is very helpful for the construction of the DID ecosystem. From the beginning, we have to design the effective pricing model for the verifier or the profit sharing model between the contributors according to the incentive mechanism. And also we have to, I think it is very important to collaborate with government because the government role is very important because there are many credentials issued by the government that are used in many situations. So we are collaborating with Korean government. Those credentials is available to our DID ecosystem.
Thank you. Alain, I have a question for you. You shared with us some cases and experiences that you had in Africa and whatnot, so you've been looking at things from a global perspective. When you look at this movement and you look at the industries that are working to solve this problem with securing private data and so forth, which sector do you think is advancing the quickest? What's the horse to bet on?
It's a difficult question to answer.
We're all listening.
There are a few horses, right? So we mentioned the pure security aspect or the passwordless, which is an easy scenario. It's convenient, and enterprise, get the idea very quickly. So that's certainly one dimension of the exercise. The multi-source credentialing, of course, to resolve KYC challenges that's ominous in the financial sector is another area of interest. You mentioned the medical exchange of record, right? Consent management and so on and so forth. That's a third domain. And the one that I mentioned earlier on, which might be one of the easiest to bootstrap actually is learning credentials. So
Excellent.
The education sector.
Anyone else have things that they could like to share in their input in regards to who you think is going to come in first place or show, or is it the other way around?
I just want to comment. We were talking earlier, and I think it's not a race any more than it was a race to get on the web. But the use cases we're seeing, it's so strong in education because that is a major part of what you're doing in education is proving that you have achieved those things, and plus academics and the educational industry love this topic. I mean, it's just extremely, so they will both study it and produce it and then use it. At the other end of the spectrum, you've got the very dollars and cents advantages to the financial services industry, right, of all kinds. I mean, one of the earliest adopters on a broad scale of the whole technology is the credit union industry, what we call here in the US. It's financial cooperatives around the world, 65,000 of them. They've realized, as an industry, if they adopt self-sovereign identity, digital credentials, they can help all of them solve a deep problem, right? They can reduce their fraud rates, and they can empower their members with a powerful new way to represent themselves and prove their identities on the internet, backed by KYC, a know your customer-based account. So I think there's very strong motivations there. And the third one I want to reinforce, government. Government's in the business of providing identity, right? And not all governments are having the same reaction to this, But some are saying, oh, this is the future. I will point to a few. Canada, I think, is a great example. Several provinces there are working on that. They're not the only one. The U.S. has started investing. UK is looking at it. Finland, getting very active. And now Korea.
Excellent. So, you know, we've had a great discussion here, and I really appreciate the feedback you've given. We're drawing close towards the end of our time, so I'm going to ask a last question, which is, do you have any parting comments or anything else that you'd like to share with the audience to give them that aspiration, to give them some guidelines that would help them as they try to build things out towards this DID world?
Go for it.
I'm going to suggest, Young-Sung, go ahead.
Well, I'm going to start. Just
Okay, sure.
join in, right? I think one of the, we mentioned that earlier, one of the things which is difficult with decentralized identity is that there is a little bit of chicken and egg, right?
Sure.
So we encourage everyone to come and experiment, try use case, don't get stuck with the technology or even the maturity of the standard, but get going with it. Just experiment. Look at what benefits you could get for your organization, for your customers. It's easy to do. You know, company like IBM and others are building sandbox and tools to get you started. We can build something in less than a couple of days to demonstrate concept. So it's an easy access, even though it might look sometimes tantalizing in size, the actual technology is easy to consume.
Anyone else?
I'm going to get at my wallet again.
More visuals.
But to really cement the visual I want to use here is this space, identity in general, is complex. It's hard. It's identity, it's security, it's privacy. And this whole new way of doing it in a decentralized manner, it can seem overwhelming. But what we found, or I found it works particularly well, is this is not complicated. And if you focus on the credential, don't think about a bunch of credentials. Pick one. Just pick one. And the use case that it would be clear in your company or your ecosystem that credential would solve. You provided several examples, right? If you go and just build your first POC around that, right? And don't worry too hard about the standards, the technology. It will support it. You will learn so much, and what will happen is you'll just start to see the value, and everyone that participates in that is going to go, oh my gosh, of course we got to adopt digital credentials, right? And suddenly you're on, and you're down the road, and you are solving real problems right from the very start. That's, yeah. Now I'll put my wallet away so I don't forget.
Pass it around, really.
Yeah, that's it.
We won't take anything. So I'd like to thank you, gentlemen. You shared a wealth of knowledge in the short period of time that we had, and I know this is a very, very important and passionate thing in your heart, and I think this could be said about our audience. I know from a Samsung perspective, we want to partner with various companies such as yours that have these ideas that can give thought leadership so that we can get to this utopian state that we're all looking for. So to the audience, I think you've seen a definition of what it is when it comes to how to go about protecting and securing your personal data. At the same time, how you can personally use these bits in a very convenient and secure manner. And this is where, of course, we have an interest. But I think it's upon yourselves to continue to do research, continue to learn and talk and so forth, so that you can build the conclusion that you wish. Because at the end of the day, as they mentioned, we're going to be looking at different types of standardizations and whatnot that can help develop and rapidly advance what we're trying to get to. But it's going to take a lot of work by everyone. It's not as simple as Drummond mentioned. It takes work. So we're running out of time, but after we're done with this, which is within a few minutes, if you have any questions, we're not going to have a Q&A session here. Outside, they'll be standing out there. Please approach them, ask them the questions, trade cards, do whatever it is that you'd like to do when it comes to networking, and certainly gain as much as you can from this. And then my final comment before closing off is, if you haven't gone to the exhibition area and visited the various booths, from a Samsung perspective, we have partners out there for Samsung blockchain, as well as other product sets. So please go out there and visit them, discuss, learn, and get your network spread out so that you can try to take advantage of all the partnerships that you can build here. So thank you very much for your attendance.